Fathi Shaqaqi only meant to pause in Malta on his way from Libya back to Syria. A simple break in the trip, nothing more. He had no reason to think this quiet Mediterranean island would become the final place he ever walked. On October 26, 1995, the leader of the Palestinian Islamic Jihad stepped out of the Diplomat Hotel in Slima and wandered through the bright streets like any passing visitor, blending into the calm afternoon. For him, Malta was just another stop, a peaceful corner far from the violence that shaped his life. But the calm did not last. Something was about to unfold, something that people still argue about today. Some say it was preemptive self-defense. Others call it a direct breach of the sovereignty of a neutral country. And if stories about intelligence work, strategy, and hidden operations interest you, the idea was to reach 10 likes on that video, since small support helps keep that kind of material coming. What made this incident even stranger was how far Malta stood from any declared conflict. No battles, no active fronts. Just a small European nation acting as a layover for a man using a fake passport under the name Dr. Ibrahim Ali Shawesh. Then two people on motorcycles closed in, fired, with a steady, trained ease, and vanished as if they had never been there. No shouts, no chase. Just Shaqaqi's body on the pavement and a whole country stunned. Headlines spread fast, and the same question echoed everywhere. Who would strike so cleanly on foreign ground, in plain daylight, with tourists and cameras all around? No official answer came out, yet most people already had a suspect in mind. Mossad, the well-known Israeli intelligence service, famous for daring and often disputed missions, fit the pattern too well. Before looking at how the operation worked, who handled it, why Malta ended up being the place, and what shifted afterward, there is something important to keep in mind. This was not a routine political hit. It became a turning point that fueled arguments about ethics, international law, and whether targeted killings even achieve their goals. Does removing a leader actually weaken a group, or does it only turn them into a martyr and push the cycle of revenge even further? That is the narrow edge this whole story sits on, and what happened in Malta that sunny day went far beyond a basic intelligence move. To make sense of all this, you need to know who Fathi Shaqaqi was and why so many governments considered him one of the most important targets in the world. Fathi Shaqaqi was not a man who picked up weapons out of sudden rage or impulsive decisions. He was a pediatrician with solid training in physics and mathematics, focused on Egypt, and he could have lived a steady life treating kids in his clinic in Gaza. Born in the early 1951 in Rafah, Gaza Strip, to a Palestinian refugee family from the village of Zanuka, Shaqaqi grew up surrounded by loss and anger. He watched the daily struggle of his community and felt that medicine alone would never touch the deeper wound he carried, the wound tied to the Israeli occupation. At some point, the path that usually leads a doctor toward a quiet career pushed him in a completely different direction. What makes a calm, educated pediatrician turn into one of the most hunted figures on the planet? The roots trace back to the Iranian Revolution in 1979. When Ayatollah Khamenei removed the Shah of Iran and built an Islamic Republic, the moment hit Shaqaqi hard. He studied it, admired it, and ended up writing a book called Khamenei, The Islamic Solution and the Alternative. The book spread fast and raised alarm just as fast. Egypt banned it almost right away because its ideas carried political weight that many leaders did not want in circulation. Shaqaqi pushed a vision that worried both Israel and secular Arab governments. He aimed to blend Palestinian national identity with a strict form of political Islam. He drew from the teachings of Hassan al-Banna and Sayyid Qutb, the early thinkers behind the Muslim Brotherhood. While Yasser Arafat and the PLO, the Palestine Liberation Organization, looked for political deals and global recognition, Shaqaqi refused that path. He argued that only armed resistance made sense, and that the movement had to be Islamic, not secular. By 1981, he and Abd el-Aziz Odeh created the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, known as PIJ.
The group rejected the 1993 Oslo Accords entirely and put all focus on direct attacks against Israeli targets. Picture the contrast. Arafat sat in meetings, wearing a suit, trying to settle years of conflict through negotiation. At the same time, Shaqaqi worked on plans for suicide operations and bomb attacks that killed civilians. This sharp divide in strategy put him right in Israel's sights. But he wasn't a reckless figure hiding in the shadows. He had presence. He spoke more than one language, read Western writers, gave interviews to foreign reporters, and kept tight ties with Iran. Through Hezbollah in Lebanon and the Iranian Revolutionary Guards, he gained financial support and military training. He became a link between Palestinian militant goals and Iran's Shiite reach across the region. Israel saw this mix as a major threat. Think of what that means. A leader who was smart, confident, connected abroad, backed with money and weapons, and ready to use suicide attacks as a main tactic. Someone like that couldn't just be ignored or handled with normal political pressure. And all of this fed into the tense climate of the 1990s, a period already shaking under the weight of new agreements, rising anger, and old conflicts returning to the surface. To understand why Shaqaqi was removed in 1995, you have to feel the mood of that decade. The Middle East sat on edge, full of deals no one fully trusted, and violence that kept breaking through.
In 1993, the Oslo Accords arrived, and many people hoped things would finally change. But the pressure only grew from there. That moment at the White House, when Yasser Arafat and Yitzhak Rabin shook hands with Bill Clinton standing between them, was supposed to mark a new chapter. It looked like a promise of calm, a path where Palestinians and Israelis might finally stop living under constant fear. Many people wanted to believe it. But plenty of others saw the scene as nothing more than a photo meant to mask deeper problems. Some figures in the Palestinian leadership agreed to talk and accept limited self-rule in exchange for recognizing Israel. Yet groups like Palestinian Islamic Jihad and Hamas viewed the move as a complete surrender. To them, the Oslo idea wasn't compromise, it was betrayal dressed up as diplomacy, and they believed the answer had to be violent. So attacks followed. Buses, markets, cafes, any crowded space that could turn into a scene of terror. They wanted to make it clear that armed resistance hadn't disappeared, that they still had the power to spoil any political deal. Israel reacted with more force, tightening pressure on these groups and pushing both sides into a cycle that only grew darker with every passing month. Now place Shaqaqi inside this picture. Staying in Gaza was no longer possible. Israel had detained him twice in the year 1983 and the year 1986, and by the year 1988 he was deported to southern Lebanon with a clear message: leave and never return. But removing him didn't calm things, it did the opposite. In Lebanon, he linked up with Hezbollah, gained advanced guerrilla training, and tapped into steady funding from Iran. For Iran, Palestinian Islamic Jihad was a useful way to strike at Israel without taking direct blame. By the early 1990s, Shaqaqi had moved his base to Damascus, where the Syrian ruler Hafez al-Assad sheltered several Palestinian faction leaders. Assad used them as leverage in his regional game against Israel. Damascus then turned into Shaqaqi's main hub. This was where he coordinated operations, handled money from Iran, and even traveled to Tripoli in Libya to seek extra support from Muammar Gaddafi. Israel watched all this unfold and saw the danger growing, not shrinking. Under Shaqaqi's direction, the PIJ carried out attacks that hit hard, including suicide bombings that killed Israeli civilians and tore at whatever hope Oslo had created. For Israel, each explosion was more than a loss of life. It was a blow to the political effort toward peace, a reminder that armed groups still had the power to sabotage negotiations. The message was simple: these factions could veto any agreement through violence. This is where the strategic tension sharpened. Arafat kept telling his people that negotiation was the only practical path.
Shaqaqi answered with bloodshed, showing that force still shaped headlines, still drew international attention, and still forced Israel into reactive mode. He became more than a militant commander. He turned into an ideological rival who threatened the whole narrative of peace. A figure with that level of influence, backed by foreign funding, protected by strong regional allies, and capable of rallying crowds with fiery rhetoric, inevitably climbed to the top of Israel's priority list. And once someone reaches that point, the Mossad begins its work. The planning starts. The preparation begins. Israel does not decide to remove such a person on impulse. It is a calculated move, shaped by clear goals, quiet intelligence work, and the belief that leaving him untouched would only fuel more bloodshed. The work behind an operation like this usually stretches for many months, sometimes even years. It mixes intelligence gathering, checking every possible risk, and building a plan piece by piece. In Shaqaqi's case, the goal stayed the same from the start – to remove the Secretary General of Palestinian Islamic Jihad and weaken the group enough to throw its activities off balance, maybe even slow the peace process. But taking out someone like Shaqaqi isn't as simple as firing a drone or dropping a bomb on a house. He was living in Damascus under the protection of the Syrian regime, moving around with false papers under the name Dr. Ibrahim Ali Shawesh, and he was careful enough to avoid anything that looked like an obvious setup. So the Mossad had to wait. They needed that tiny window when his guard would drop, when his movements would be predictable, and when a team could strike and vanish before anyone knew what happened. That moment finally showed up after Israeli intelligence learned that Shaqaqi planned to travel from Libya back to Syria with a stop in Malta. Malta, at that time, was almost tailor-made for a covert hit. In the 1990s, it was a small island country with fewer than 400,000 people, light security compared to bigger European states, and a steady stream of tourists and passengers coming through its airports and ports. Its spot in the middle of the Mediterranean made it a natural waypoint for travel between North Africa and the Middle East. For the Mossad, all of this made the place close to ideal. You could watch someone without standing out. You could blend into crowds. Renting a car or a flat wouldn't raise questions, and planning a getaway by sea or air offered several backup routes if something went wrong. The downside was the diplomatic fallout. Malta was neutral, part of the European Union, and killing someone on its soil meant stepping over its sovereignty. But Israel had carried out operations in foreign countries before, and its leaders assumed the political noise would fade while Shaqaqi would be permanently gone.
Once the target's travel pattern became clear, the Mossad team followed his movements between Damascus, Libya, and Malta, building a picture of his routines and the soft spots in his schedule. The logistics behind something like this are intense, and it's important to say this is a historical description, not a guide. A small unit usually handles the job, often between 4 and 8 people. Each one has a narrow role, watching the target, carrying out the hit, providing cover, and handling the escape. They relied on encrypted communication because even a minor leak could wreck everything. The choice of a motorcycle as both approach and exit tool wasn't an accident. A bike moves fast, slips through traffic, is hard to block, and lets the team get right next to the target, act, and break away in seconds. Reports also say the gun used had a built-in system to catch the spent casings, making sure nothing was left behind that could tie the weapon to the scene. This level of preparation showed how far the group had gone. They moved around in rented cars, likely kept a small workspace where gear could be tucked away and paperwork arranged, and already had several exit plans ready. One route probably involved heading out to sea and boarding a boat once they reached international waters. Another option may have been a routine commercial flight under assumed names. All these pieces were being set in place while Shaqaqi drifted through the streets of Salima, calm and relaxed, with no idea that eyes followed him at every turn and that the last moments of his life were already slipping away. The execution, October 26, 1995, Salima, Malta. Late afternoon, the sun still bright and steady. Tourists wander along the promenade, pausing here and there for photos or to watch the water. The Mediterranean taps slightly against the rocks, giving the whole place that quiet coastal feel. And then, within a few seconds, everything flips. Fathi Shaqaqi steps out of the Diplomat Hotel, or maybe from a nearby store, the accounts differ a bit, and walks normally along the street. He probably feels secure, thinking neutral ground means fewer dangers and fewer eyes hunting him. Behind him, two riders on a motorcycle ease closer. They do not rev the engine. They do not make sharp moves. They look like regular passers-by cutting through the area. The whole approach is calm, timed, and controlled. At almost no distance, they fire several rounds straight at Shaqaqi's head. In some tellings, the gun is fitted with a suppressor, which would explain why the crowd reacts only after a delay. There is no sharp blast, no instant panic. It feels more like a brief disturbance than an attack.
And when people talk about that signature, they mean a familiar pattern seen in earlier operations: a fast strike, minimal sound, a compact weapon like a .22 caliber pistol or something similar, a tool effective up close but easy to hide. The motorcycle gives them quick access and a clean route out. There is also a small technical point that often gets overlooked. Some versions describe the gun as having a mechanism to hold the spent shells, keeping them from dropping onto the street and denying the Maltese police easy ballistic clues. Another thing stands out. The whole attack is designed to avoid dragging bystanders into the line of fire. No stray bullets, no wounded tourists, no spectacle. This comes from long training and steady nerves built through many covert actions. Mossad was not aiming to send a public message. It came to remove a threat, and it did exactly that. Now think about this. Shaqaqi was moving around under an invented identity. He understood the danger and tried to shield himself. Even so, Israeli intelligence still pinpointed him, figured out his brief stop in Malta, assembled a team, carried out the hit, and slipped away almost instantly, leaving barely anything for investigators to grab onto in those first critical hours. This demanded more than technical skill. It meant building a web of informants, running steady electronic monitoring, and maybe even slipping someone into Shaqaqi's own circle to map out the exact moment and spot where he would be exposed. And the decision to strike in Malta was no accident. The place put him far from Damascus, far from any Syrian cover, far from Hezbollah, far from Iran. Out there he had no backup. He blended in with travelers, moving like any other person passing through, without the heavy protection he relied on when he stayed in areas controlled by allies. Nothing about that bright afternoon was chance. It was the end point of long intelligence work, patient planning, and a clean, practiced hit. And once Shaqaqi's body was found on the street, the reaction was almost instant. The world flared up, and the noise around the killing felt as charged as the operation itself. The first wave hit fast. News of Fathi Shaqaqi's death spread through media and communities in a matter of moments. Allies, rivals, and followers of the Palestinian Islamic Jihad responded at once, and the split in reactions was sharp. Mourning started immediately, but it wasn't quiet or tired. It came with anger, vows of retaliation, and heavy talk of sacrifice. Shaqaqi was raised to the level of martyr on the spot, a symbol of resistance who, in their view, died for the Palestinian fight. Leaders from the PI, Hamas, Hezbollah, and officials in Iran sent out statements pushing the same line. They called for the struggle to continue, insisted that his death carried meaning, and promised it would not fade without an answer. In Gaza, crowds filled the streets.
People held posters with Shaqaqi's face high above them. The message was simple and firm. Leaders can be killed, but resistance would keep going. This message was not only emotional, it worked as strategy. Turning Shaqaqi into a martyr gave the organization a fresh tool to bring in recruits, justify new attacks, and keep its supporters energized. His death, in a strange way, gave the PIJ a lasting symbol they could rely on for years. At the same time, Malta and much of the world were stunned. Malta was known as calm, scenic, built around tourism. It was not the kind of place where people expected a political killing in the middle of the day. The international press moved fast. Reporters swarmed the story, and headlines ran with theories about who ordered the hit, how the team worked, and what kind of global fallout could follow. Many people were upset that a sovereign country had its territory used for an assassination without notice, approval, or any clear legal channel. This was not a battlefield. This was Europe, a place where people assumed they were far from this kind of conflict. The debates that followed were intense. They touched on sovereignty, on national defense, on how far a state might go to eliminate a threat, and whether such actions could ever be justified. And here's the thing. Even some who understood Israel's position and accepted that Shaqaqi had been linked to attacks on civilians struggled with the way the operation happened. The location, the method, and the lack of any formal process made it a hard event for many to accept, no matter where they stood. The Maltese authorities ended up in a spot they could not escape. They opened an investigation right away because a killing on their soil could not be brushed aside. But it was clear they were facing something far beyond their reach. Malta had no real means to track an operation run by Mossad, no intelligence network suited for that, and no leverage strong enough to push Israel in any meaningful way. Many observers thought the government understood this from the start. Any pressure would stay symbolic, nothing more. The tension in diplomatic circles grew fast. Malta issued formal protests and asked for explanations, but no charges were ever filed and no extradition request was made. And really, who would they even demand? Israel never admitted anything. Yet reporters, intelligence experts, and even some former Mossad officers who spoke years later all pointed toward Israel. Officially, though, there was only silence. That silence played a role. By refusing to confirm or deny, Israel kept the uncertainty that worked on two levels. It warned other militant leaders that they could be next, and it also gave Israel room to maneuver diplomatically because no admission meant no direct responsibility. So there was no formal blame to anchor onto. While the arguments and statements continued on the world stage, a simple question stayed in the air. Was the public story the full story? This is where the case grew even more tangled. When you mix secret operations with the absence of any confession and a long list of conflicting accounts, you get a picture that shifts every time someone new tries to piece it together. Most major media outlets pointed to Israel. Papers like the New York Times and The Guardian, as well as Western intelligence sources speaking off the record, all repeated the same conclusion. The Mossad carried out the hit. But once you look at the details, the reports drift apart. Some accounts talk about 2 precise shots to the head. Others claim there were 4 or even 5. Some mention the bullet striking the forehead. Others say the shots hit the back of the neck. The story of the motorcycle used in the escape also changes. Was it stolen? Was it arranged through local helpers? No one can say with certainty. Even the timing of the killing is unclear. Some claim Shaqaqi was leaving the hotel. Others swear he had just returned from buying a few things in town. These differences may sound minor, but in forensic work and leader historical review, they matter a lot. They show how hard it is to settle on one firm version when the only people who truly know the sequence of events are the ones who carried out the operation, and they are not about to talk. The fallout from the case shaped a major debate in international law. The arguments over legality, ethics, and the limits of state power grew into one of the most intense discussions of modern times. On one side, there is the claim that picking a target outside an active battlefield amounts to an extrajudicial killing. It crosses borders without permission, ignores any sort of legal process, and sets a rule that lets any state send its people to eliminate anyone it labels an enemy on someone else's soil. Picture that becoming routine. Russia taking out a dissident in London, China removing activists in Taiwan, Iran hunting opponents across Europe. The whole system of international norms would fall apart. On the other side, Israel and its supporters insist that Shaqaqi was not some random civilian caught in the middle. They describe him as a key figure who organized and approved attacks that killed many people, including women and children. From that viewpoint, dealing with someone who hides behind civilians, evades every legal structure, and plans violence from the shadows leaves little room for standard arrests or negotiations. Under this logic, removing him before he could order more attacks becomes not only acceptable but required to protect future victims. So the argument circles back to the old question: do you bend legal rules to stop imminent threats, or do you hold to principles even if it means more bloodshed? And the uncertainties go further. No one can agree on how the Mossad team actually exited Malta. Some accounts say they left by boat, reached international waters, and boarded an Israeli vessel.
Others describe them walking through the airport with fake identities, blending in with regular travelers. There is also the issue of local help. It seems likely that someone in Malta handled logistics, but their identity is still unclear. Were they working for money, recruited long before, or pressured into helping? Even the details around the weapon remain murky. Was it recovered by investigators or removed by the operatives? And what about the timeline? How many minutes passed between the shots and the first police patrol arriving? These gaps stick around because operations like this are built to leave trails that fade quickly, to replace clarity with uncertainty. Historians, reporters, and researchers keep digging, trying to connect each missing piece. But as the first days after Shaqaqi's death passed, one point was already obvious. No matter which version eventually becomes accepted, and no matter how the ethical arguments shake out, the killing in Malta carried heavy strategic weight, both in the short term and far beyond. From a direct tactical angle, Israel saw the action as a complete success. Shaqaqi was gone. The Palestinian Islamic Jihad suddenly lost the figure who shaped its strategy, held international ties together, and oversaw financing and planning. When the central decision-maker disappears, the rest of the group needs weeks or even months to rebuild. During that stretch, the PIJ shifted inward. It worried more about survival and restructuring than about new operations. Its momentum stalled. For Israel, this brought a short period of eased pressure. The broader peace efforts gained some space to move without the constant fear of another strike aimed at derailing everything. And the signal sent to other terrorist commanders was hard to miss. It said that no matter where you stay, no matter who shields you, once you are seen as a real danger, someone will come after you. This type of psychological pressure sits at the core of Israeli strategy. It is not only about removing one figure from the fight. It is meant to push every other opponent to hesitate before taking action. But the trouble shows up fast. The whole idea of cutting off the head of an organization has serious limits, and the Shaqaqi case made that obvious. In only a few weeks, Palestinian Islamic Jihad named Ramadan Shalah as its new Secretary General. He was a U.S.-based scholar with a doctorate in economics, and he slipped into the role quickly, took control, and restarted the group's work. The organization did not collapse or scatter. It stayed intact. Shaqaqi himself shifted into the role of martyr, and his killing became material for new recruits. After that, PIJ gained strength again, both in reach and in its ability to carry out attacks. This points to a hard reality in asymmetric conflict and in any long fight against militant networks. These groups are built to survive shocks.
They rely on loose structures, backup leadership, and a shared story of sacrifice that replaces leaders as soon as they fall. When one leader is gone, the story around their death often draws in more people. It is close to cutting off one head of a hydra and seeing more appear. Israel succeeded in removing Shaqaqi, but his ideas stayed alive. Funding from Iran continued. The political tension and harsh living conditions that push young Palestinians toward radical groups did not disappear. None of those deeper drivers were touched. Reactions outside the region were messy as well. Several European governments, the UN, and human rights groups spoke out against Israel,
calling the act a clear breach of international law. Malta was openly upset on a diplomatic level. Arab states pointed to the case as proof of Israeli state violence. Palestinian militants used it as an easy example to argue that Israel respected nothing, not borders, not laws, not human life. Yet at the same time, many Western states, mainly the United States, kept their public comments muted. They faced their own battles with terrorism and understood why Israel acted, even if they could not say so out loud. This split between public statements and private views shows how states manage appearances. You criticize in front of cameras, but behind closed doors, you take notes and consider using the same methods later. And that is what played out over the next decades. More countries adopted targeted killing policies, often citing earlier cases like the Shaqaqi operation to justify them. The Malta strike did more than reshape Palestinian Islamic Jihad. It reshaped how governments think about security, borders, and the limits they are willing to cross when they believe a threat is serious. Those shifts left a long shadow that still sparks arguments now. The story around Fathi Shaqaqi began turning into myth the moment his body reached the ground in Slema. For Palestinian Islamic Jihad, for Hamas, and for hardline Islamist groups across the Middle East, he never simply passed away. They treated his death as a sacred event, raising him to the rank of Shaheed, a figure honored for giving his life in the fight against what they call the Zionist occupation. Huge posters with his portrait spread across walls in Gaza and the West Bank. Preachers in mosques praised his resolve and the way he lived. Families named their newborn sons after him, and writers shaped poems and songs that traced his supposed path into paradise. This whole set of images was not only meant to stir emotions, it served a direct strategic purpose. It turned one dead man into a lasting emblem. And an emblem matters more than any single person, because it cannot be detained, expelled, or killed a second time. You can remove Shaqaqi, but you cannot erase the idea tied to his name. That idea keeps drawing in younger recruits, pushing them to admire him, copy him, and keep the movement alive.
Many years later, Israel could claim that the operation in Malta solved an immediate problem, yet it also surrendered a piece of the broader story. Each time someone joins the PIJ and mentions Shaqaqi as the reason, the event in the year 1995 keeps shaping the present. The larger impact over the medium and long term is even harder to measure. In the years right after Shaqaqi's death, Palestinian Islamic Jihad struggled. It lost parts of its financial backing, dealt with pressure from authorities in Gaza, and fell into the shadow of Hamas. Hamas was larger, better structured, and had both a political branch and an armed one, giving it reach that the PIJ lacked. Still, the landscape shifted during the 2010 decade, especially after the Syrian war and stronger Iranian involvement. The PIJ gathered fresh support, rebuilt its network, restored its ability to strike Israel with rockets, and today stands as the second biggest armed group in Gaza, right behind Hamas. The break caused by Shaqaqi's killing turned out to be brief. The group adjusted, reorganized, and moved forward. This brings up a hard question. Was the act worth it? If the aim was to destroy the PIJ or shut it down permanently, the clear answer is no. But if the aim was to send a warning, slow the group's activities, and force it to spend effort recovering instead of attacking, then some would argue the result fits a strategy of containment rather than outright destruction. And that is where the uneasy boundary still sits. Where is the point that separates preventive security from an extrajudicial killing? When does deterrence turn into the creation of new martyrs who keep the conflict burning? How do you defend your citizens without stepping past the international rules built to keep the world from sliding into disorder? There is no simple answer. Anyone trying to be honest will accept that if you are an Israeli who lost a relative in an attack linked to Shaqaqi, you might view Malta as justice served. And if you are a Palestinian living under occupation, you may see the same event as another case of a state taking a life without consequence, acting as if no law applies to it. And if you are Maltese, European, or just someone who thinks countries should follow clear rules, the idea that outside operatives can kill people on your soil without facing consequences feels wrong on many levels. The Shaqaqi case still stands, after almost 3 full decades, as a sharp example of this mix of moral uncertainty and strategic confusion. It reminds you that long conflicts, especially ones shaped by religion, nationalism, and old wounds, rarely offer neat answers. They force choices that are heavy, messy, and often lead to outcomes no one can fully predict. And those outcomes are still playing out now, which brings the story back to that warm afternoon of October 26, 1995. So we return to the first question.
Did the Malta operation actually remove the danger, or did it help keep the long chain of retaliation alive, the same chain that has marked the Israeli-Palestinian struggle for so many years? The honest reply is that the judgment depends on what you choose to measure. If you take the view of an Israeli military planner, the operation checked every box. The target was removed. The team slipped out safely. The enemy network was shaken, and a signal was sent to other leaders who might have been planning attacks. From that narrow viewpoint, it was a clean operation. You could mark it down as a win and close the file. But when you pull back and look at the wider scene, the picture shifts. 3 full decades later, Palestinian Islamic Jihad is still active, still launches strikes on Israel, still receives money and backing from Iran. Fathi Shaqaqi is now held up as a martyr, his image printed on banners, his name shouted at rallies. The group Israel tried to cripple did not vanish. It adjusted, reorganized, and continues to trouble Israel's security planners. So what really changed? The hard truth is that much changed on the surface, while very little shifted at the core. This is where the larger debate comes in, the tension between short-term operational gains and the legal, moral, and diplomatic fallout that shadows actions like this. Yes, Israel achieved its immediate goal and killed Shaqaqi. Yes, it rattled the JIP for a while, but the cost was real. It faced criticism abroad, strain with Malta and other European governments, and new material for its opponents who pushed the narrative of Israel as a rogue actor. And maybe the biggest consequence is that the operation turned one man into a myth, giving him a status that outlived his actual role. In conflicts as long and layered as the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, where each side carries deep stories, painful memories, and a sense of justice that directly clashes with the other side's, a tactical win can produce effects that cancel out the benefit. You can remove one fighter today and set the stage for several more tomorrow, all driven by the story of the martyr you created. It is like playing chess on a board where the pieces you capture come back into play, only now under the control of your rival. So in the end, what truly shifted on October 26, 1995? The answer is both a lot and far less than anyone hoped. Malta got a harsh reminder that location doesn't save you from bigger forces. A country can be small, calm, and outside major blocks, but once a larger struggle touches its borders, its land becomes part of that struggle, whether it agrees or not. That is how it played out here. Israel treated the situation as another precise move in the long routine of the Mossad, a routine built on rare wins that never shift the deeper reality. The larger conflict stays the same, a constant cycle where victories only delay the next threat.
Palestinian Islamic Jihad lost a commander, yet gained a symbol. And for groups built on rigid ideology, a fallen figure can fuel their story even more. And the idea of justice drifted further away, turning even harder to define, shaped by where a person stands, who they trust, and which side they consider their own. The Malta operation settled nothing. It only added another scene to a conflict that stretches across generations. Each group insists it holds the moral high ground, and any clear truth stays hidden under years of violence, broken trust, and competing memories.
When you look at what happened to Fathi Shaqaqi in Malta, you're left with questions that don't fade. Understanding how intelligence services work, why states act the way they do, and how leaders justify their choices isn't just about studying history. It helps you look at events with sharper eyes. It lets you question neat stories and notice the gaps, the assumptions, the parts left out. Real life almost never divides cleanly into good and bad. So when someone speaks with total certainty about terrorism, security, or global disputes, you might think back to the Shaqaqi case. You might catch yourself asking whether eliminating one enemy fixes anything, or whether it only reshapes the conflict into a new form. These moments of doubt matter. They turn information into something you actually work with instead of just repeating. And this leads to harder questions. Did Israel act within acceptable limits when it carried out the execution in Malta? Or did it cross a boundary that should stay untouched no matter the threat? Do results excuse the methods used to reach them? Or are there rules that must stand firm even when danger feels immediate? If you were the one making the call, on the Israeli side, the Palestinian side, or the Maltese side, what choice would you have made, and why? These questions push you to look at your own beliefs, the lines you would or would not cross, and the kind of world you think is worth building. So think it through. How far would you go for the safety of the people you care about, and what limits would you set for yourself? Share your view in the comments. A steady, honest exchange of ideas helps all of us grow into people who can handle complexity instead of running from it. And hey, if you got to this point, took in all this heavy history, and still want more on covert work, global power moves, strategy, and the off-record stuff you never see in regular news, then go ahead and follow this channel and switch on the alerts. You've already shown you like digging into things that take some thought, and that's what we put out here week after week. We break down events, give context, and explain the parts most people skip, and there's a lot more of that ahead. New videos are coming with more odd corners of history, more strategic breakdowns, and more plain facts that people tend to ignore. If you want to keep going with all that, just follow, turn on the alerts, and stick around. There's still a long path to walk through this material, and it's better when you're here for each step. So stay with the channel, keep the alerts on, and we'll pick this up again in the next video.